Peace, family. A recent report just came out stating that black people have lost $156 billion in home value due to devaluation based on segregation. The media is calling this a segregation tax. And what they're basically saying is you could have a home in the black community and you build that same home, and I mean, when I say same home, same square footage, same lot size, same everything. And if you place that same home in a white community, that same home will possibly be about $40,000 in greater value or more, depending on location. So $156 billion in devaluation of our homes. And they've sold the idea to us that home ownership is the American dream. And that in order to call yourself successful in America, you must become a homeowner. But at the same time, if you're black in America, they undercut you and devalue your homes. This is something that's very, very serious, because we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we close the wealth gap when the playing field is so uneven? But I wanted to speak to us a little bit less about these actual numbers and the devaluation of homes and things of that nature. And I want to spark a conversation with us about how black people determine what is valuable. So let's just say you live in a home right now. You want to determine how valuable it is. You look up the appraisal district's last appraisal on it to see, okay, what's my home worth? Well, it's worth $80,000, $90,000 on the market. But who controls the market? And if white people are former slave masters, our oppressor, if they continue to have control over the markets that determine the value of what we own, will we ever have anything? Will we ever close the wealth gap? The answer to that question is emphatically no. We, brothers and sisters, have to build our own economic system and create our own markets that determine what's valuable to us. Because as long as white people, white America, the government, as long as they have the right to determine what's valuable to black people, we will always be undervalued and devalued. Prove this to me, Brother Deric. Well, if you as a black person are undervalued yourself, and we as black people are undervalued ourselves, this is why you had a movement called Black Lives Matter. If your very life is undervalued, then anything that you build will be undervalued by them if you don't place proper value on it yourself. Now, let's take a look at Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was called Black Wall Street because it resembled White Wall Street in New York City. So I asked myself the question, how much was Black Wall Street worth? Like, if there were a value, a number to be attached to Black Wall Street as an asset to Black America, what would it have been worth? Would it have been worth 50 million, 100 million? We don't know. But what we do know is that if you allow White Wall Street to determine the value of Black Wall Street, then Black Wall Street will always be undervalued. So they call this a segregation tax. I call it an integration tax. And it's an integration tax because We were duped into thinking that if we integrated with white America, that the things that we owned would increase in value. I'll give you an example. Let's say you had a black family who lived in a black town. Now, these were towns that we owned, towns that we built. We owned the property. We determined who the police chief was. We determined who the mayor was going to be. These were our towns. And when they told us that we now had the right to live next to Miss Ann and Peter Higginbotham and his children, we moved out of what we owned and we moved into the white community. But why would you move to your community? I mean, from your community. It wasn't a ghetto. There were no crack houses or crack dens back then. There was really no black on black violence back then. Why did you move? You moved because psychologically we have been programmed to think that the closer we are to white people, the more value we had. Like they were valuable to us, and we felt like the more closer we move in proximity to them, we could borrow some of their value. So you move next door to Miss Ann, and before you could hop the fence to knock on the door to meet your white neighbors, they had already moved. They call it white flight. So the house that they moved from, other black families begin to occupy those houses. Next thing you know, that white neighborhood has now become a black neighborhood. Now, the white people that moved out look back at that black neighborhood and they went over there and they told us that the property in that neighborhood was all of a sudden devalued. It's lost its value. Why? Because you moved out? You mean to tell me that we still live in an era where the presence of white people determine what's valuable and what is not to us? No, we got to do something different. So when they told us that that white community that used to be black lost its value, then what did we do? We moved out of that community and moved into the one where white people moved to, trying to get away from us. Then they moved further out. Then we chased them some more and moved as far as we could to try to chase after them until they got tired of running, and then they moved back into the community that they moved away from in the first place. We call it gentrification. And isn't it interesting that the very neighborhoods that they told us lost their value now all of a sudden have value again because white people are moving back in? Brothers and sisters, it is a psychological game that they play on us. So we have to now come together, the best and brightest economic minds that we have, and we have to come up with our own independent system of determining what is valuable to us. Do you know what the meaning of white supremacy is? White supremacy represents the preservation of the white race. Matter of fact, it represents the preservation of all things white over all things non-white. That includes your property. So it doesn't matter how big your house is. If we continue to depend on the system that determines our value right now, your house could be the same size as somebody white's, and it'll be less valuable to them because you were there. So it's time out for black people allowing white people to determine what is valuable to us. Black people determine, or we must determine, what's valuable to black people. There is no other way. Peace.